Good evening and welcome to League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson and our topic tonight is the state of the American worker. American workers report they're more stressed, less paid, less healthy, and less appreciated than ever before. Yet over the past 3 decades, the share of workers who are union members has fallen by half. Next week, in a showdown over labor unions, the Missouri legislature will attempt to override the governor's veto of the so-called right-to-work measure and join 25 other states with such laws. We're sandwiched in between the National Labor Day holiday to honor workers and the veto session next week, and it's a good time to talk about American labor. Our guest tonight, on my immediate left, is Matt PEZOLD. He's a labor education specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. And this fall, he's teaching a course titled Labor Union Leadership for a Globalized World. To his left is REGINA GUEVARA. She's a field representative for Laborers International Union of North America, Local 773 in Columbia. And she represents service and maintenance employees at the University of Missouri campus and hospitals, City of Columbia, Boone County Public Works, and other workers in mid-Missouri. And to REGINA's left is JESS NEWKIRK. He's a Columbia businessman who has a background in contract employees for Marriott Company, and with his son built a local business called B&B Bagels. Welcome to all our panelists.
Thank you.
What can we say about the state of the American worker? Matt, I'll start with you because you're right here.
Okay. Well, I mean, in many ways you summed it up in the fact that workers are increasingly stressed, and a lot of the research over the past couple of years have shown that, wages for most workers are stagnant, and, they're facing increased pressures at home as well as in their personal lives. And so this creates an environment where there's greater worker dissatisfaction, and there's also trends like increasing poverty. And these factors ultimately play out in our own communities, whether it be crime rate, whether it be struggling schools. You see all these sort of debates all across the state, and these are important issues that ultimately come down to wages and can families support themselves or not.
REGINA, you represent public employee unions.
Right.
What are the issues that you are dealing with, and how do they affect the workers?
I think mostly the worker is pulled like a rubber band to maximum capacity, and they're doing a lot more work with a lot less people with the same standard and with not enough pay. And so we struggle, and when we negotiate, contracts for them, we get, pennies and not dollars in raises. So it's hard to raise a family, especially in service and maintenance work, which is mostly custodial, food service, our trades, but essentially low pay and just not appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jess, I venture to say you've got a little different perspective on labor.
It's interesting. Today I read a report by the government that says that in July there were 5 million unfilled jobs in the United States, and that people are not leaving their jobs fast enough to fill the 4.1 million that were created in July. So there's an economy here. I think that part of the problem is that there's not a motivation for the young worker to get out and get a job at a starting wage to build on up.
Now, I believe I read just a day or two ago about the workers now are becoming the millennial generation, as moving into the Generation X for a short time was the largest employee group after the baby boomers. Baby boomers are retiring. Gen X was a relatively small group, and now we've got millennials. How are they different than us boomers?
Well, I think, Jim, probably you and I started working when we were young teenagers, if not before. And we were able to work because we grew up in a small town or a farm or whatever. Today, the young people don't have that opportunity. And it's very difficult to find a job at 12, 13, 14 years of age that can get a person started in their long-term work career. And the other thing is, I talked to a person, a manager this week, and was offering a full-time job. And the only stipulation was that the person couldn't wear their nose ring, and she turned the job down. And you and I would never have done that, let alone have it.
I took my nose ring out before I came. Respond to that.
Talking about
Union
nose
guys,
rings, yeah.
I mean, are the expectations of the workers different? Are they reasonable in your opinion? How do you deal with those sorts of issues?
I think for the younger worker, I think that we don't have such a importance put on trade work and working with your hands and learning. We're such in a fast-paced technical world that when kids get out of high school, they have two options, school and more school, or you have to work the minimum wage job or the housekeeper job or those starter jobs that I represent. And so when they get there, I don't think we're just not where we used to be, and the work ethic is a lot different. And what I struggle with the most with the workers is just what can I get, for the less work I do, or if I work really hard, it really doesn't matter because nobody cares because of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's because they're not valued in that lower level job. Maybe their expectation to work is not as high. I mean, that's kind of what I find.
Matt, any thoughts on the worker today?
Well, I think there's in the past generations, like the boomers and whatnot, you often had a two-parent household. You had probably dad working, mom at home. But we're living in a different society now where there's a lot of households that only have a single parent trying to earn income, or you have both parents working. So the trade-off between the demands at home and the work are highly competing with one another today. And so workers want some flexibility, especially the millennials. They want the ability to determine their hours. But then on the other hand, you have some workplaces where they're expecting workers to be on call essentially 24 hours for shift work. They might call you in at a retail store, work a few hours, and send you back home. And so in these sort of situations, workers really don't have the ability to plan their lives. They can't coordinate childcare. They can't, run a life as the average person might be able to because they're always on call. If they don't answer the phone call, they lose their job. So it's a very unstable environment for people on that end of the spectrum where they have to try to survive and to support their families.
I think it's my impression that there are a lot of social factors at work here and changing social situations and mores. And also, I think we're still in a transition between a kind of an industrial economy and a service knowledge economy. And do you agree? I mean, are things in transition here for the worker, or is this normal?
I would say we're definitely in a transition moving to there, and a lot of the new jobs created since the last recession are in the service industry. Unfortunately, they're not the type of jobs that people want to keep long-term. They don't provide a lot of benefits or security. So while jobs are being created, they're not the type of jobs that allow people to start families, allow people to support their children. And so you wind up with all these social economic factors that are negative on the community. If you have a low tax base and you can't support your schools, and you have struggling communities, and you potentially have higher crime rates when people are struggling just to make ends meet. So there's strong communities are based off of good wages and the ability to support families. So when those start to break down, you have a lot of negative impacts on the greater society as well.
Jess, you've always been involved in the service industry. How did, 30 years ago?
Well, when I started in contract food service as a college student, by the way, I worked my way through, we were making 50 cents an hour. And I guess I'd like to say that the places I worked that had good management, once that person started, they moved up the ranks. So if a person came to work, did their job, et cetera, we did our best to try to keep them, and because we've got training, et cetera, invested in them, and then we tried to promote them up. So I've been struck recently by this doing away with or changing the rules on overtime, management overtime, and I think that the requested change now will make it $56,000 as a base before anybody is overtime exempt. And we used to use that as a promotion up from an hourly to a half manager's position for training purposes, and to help that person decide if they really wanted to go into management and make that decision. And I hate to see that move to $56,000, because I think it's too far. Now back to the millennials, though. I'm sorry. I have a grandson that just graduated, and he with a 4-year degree, bachelor's degree, and he goes to work about 10 a.m. and has his coffee and gets his laptop out and does his work. Now I just don't understand it, but that's part of the new economy. And he lives in Nashville, and so recently I visited with him when he visited his folks down near Springfield, and he sat at the dining room table and did work for 3 days, but still had that freedom to be where he wants. Certainly that's foreign to me, but I think as was mentioned here, I think a lot of the students or the people today have not had work experience. It's difficult to get it. But most of us started our career in working at a starting career at McDonald's or a service career, and then branched out and went on to other places. Mm-hmm. And I think we're missing the boat there today. Yeah. I noticed today also the Chipotle had it was open special this morning in all their locations, and they were going to try to hire 4,000 people this morning. Now, I've not heard how that went, but the Chipotle nationwide was going to be open special, and each store was to try to interview 60 people for potential employment. Mm-hmm. So that area is open. I guess I got to ask why there's not a motivation in the worker today, the millennial, to take some of those jobs and work themselves up.
Mm-hmm. If, and it may be, but is the opportunity there for them to work up? I mean,
I believe it is.
We have a service economy. I guess you got to have management.
When I was in charge of hiring and disciplining and training managers, the ones we wanted were the ones that started as a student worker and worked themselves up. Mm-hmm. Because they had the experience, we knew them, we trained them, they knew what the expectations were. I can remember as a sophomore in college telling my dad I'd never go into food service because they worked too hard. Mm-hmm. But I wound up spending a career of 30 years plus in service contracts.
Yeah. Well, how does that, I mean, when you have a economy that is moving further and further to service, to the McDonald's or the B&B Bagels or,
Chipotle.
Chipotle. What kind of challenges does that present to labor, to unions? I mean, that's not been a big area for labor unions in the past, right?
Right.
We've seen some organization, as with the McDonald's, the movement for minimum wage.
Right. There's a fight for 15, and they have put pressures on places like McDonald's, and other chains have raised their minimum wage. Walmart is gradually raising their starting wage from $9, and I think soon it'll be 10 within the next year. But ultimately, the workers still don't really have any more rights in the workplace. Getting back to a starting place for workers, I think one of the big things that have changed over the past 20, 30 years from the 80s was we did have manufacturing jobs. And the manufacturing job used to pay living wages where you could have a middle-class lifestyle. Since then, millions of these jobs have left, and what's replaced them are these service industry jobs, which are often starting entry jobs. So now you have, people in their 20s, 30s competing with, the teenager trying to get a starting experience. So if you're an employer, who are you going to choose? You're going to choose a teenager, or are you going to choose, someone that's 20 or 30 years old and, has to have the job and who less likely to walk away? So you have this shift in the economy is changing the model for socioeconomic advancement for society.
Mm-hmm. Are there, you talked about the relatively low pay and low status of the employees that you represent.
Right.
Why do they stay in those jobs then, or are there advance?
I think it's a high turnover because the work is hard, it's manual labor, and because the wages can't sustain a family, it gets very difficult. And I think that the idea of what we used to do 30, 40 years ago, that they would move up, that's just not common anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So say I'm housekeeping and I work there for 15 years and I want to strive to be a supervisor or the manager, or I want to move forward. Unless I go and get an education, I can't move up because we need more schooling and education, and that's what those, hospital, like the hospital workers.
Mm-hmm.
They want a bachelor's degree for those managers. So when, as a housekeeper, am I going to find time to go to school full time to be able to get those credentials to be able to step up? And I think that's where, once you get into that, unless you can balance both that, which is working in the night and going to school in the day, that's very difficult. And the reality is that these aren't young people that are doing these jobs. Especially in fast food. I mean, they're just not the young people anymore.
Let's switch focus for a bit to the Missouri legislature and right to work. 25 states already have some form of right to work, and Missouri legislature passed a law in the past session making Missouri the 26th. Governor vetoed it, and it looks like the legislature might have the votes to override the veto. What will that mean to private labor unions? And
I mean, for one thing, it just makes the job of, keeping your membership in the labor union so much harder. You constantly have to recruit members to pay the dues in order to support the efforts of the union, to work to negotiate the contract with the employer. So it's diverting a lot of the union's energy towards maintaining membership instead of trying to grow membership or try to address other issues. So, it's a way to weaken the union ultimately, and so there can be cost to the union and to middle class jobs as a result. But it doesn't mean that unions can't continue to exist. It just means that it's harder for them to go about the business that they're there to do.
well, if playing devil's advocate, if I'm an employer, I say, well, if the union offers a benefit to the worker, why do they have to have mandatory dues? Why can't the union attract membership without the mandatory aspect?
You like to field this one, Regina?
Well, I know in private sector, if you're a closed shop, nothing is ever mandatory. But you will pay an agency fee, which is a cost for the representation, because that's what they do. They are representing you, and by law, you have to represent that bargaining unit. So essentially, you can become a member, but you're not required to be a member, but you will pay some type of fee for having representation,
Mm-hmm.
but you're never required to be a member. So that kind of is a little clarification. There's
So
still a
calling
fee.
that dues is not accurate.
Right, it's a
Okay.
fee, because I'm still representing you and you will get the benefits of that contract once it's implemented. For public sector, which I'm more familiar with, we are already in the kind of right to work status because we don't fall under the NLRB or NLRA rules. We don't have enough labor laws on the books to protect public sector employees. Teachers are one good example that, people don't believe that teachers should have a right to collectively bargain their working conditions because they're paid with public dollars. Same with police, same with fire. And for a long time, in the state of Missouri, it was illegal for them to do that. So I think that, as public employees, we feel like second-class citizens. And so the right to work will just allow for them to pay lower wages from our perspective. And it's a huge challenge because it's voluntary. In a right to work state, everything's it's voluntary, and your union membership is what I mean is voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it a lot harder for, you know, the organizer, because again, like Matt said, your job is now just to try to put all your efforts into continuing to organize rather than to represent.
One major difference, I would think, is with public employees unions, they don't have the right to strike. And
Yes.
right to work would not take that right away from private employee unions, right?
Right, they would still have that right. But,
Maybe not as much strength behind it.
right, but strike, due to the complications and legalities of the nature of when you can strike, a lot of contracts prevent the union from striking during the term of the contract. So strikes really become relatively rare in today's age due to legal regulations.
Jess, I know you have worked in right-to-work states and non-right-to-work states.
Correct.
Tell us about it.
Well, I think if the union is doing their job and representing the employees properly, it doesn't make a lot of difference either way. If the union does not aggressively represent their employees, take care of their rights, and I think the purpose for organizing is to make certain that the rights of the workers are not tread on or squashed. Good management should not have a problem working with the union or without the union. That said, I guess because I grew up in management, I'd rather have a right to work state than but I've worked in both. I've worked in Ohio, Missouri, Kansas, Florida. I've worked at all those different situations and worked with different contracts and different unions and had good and bad unions, as there are good and bad managers, you know.
You know, looking ahead, we talked a little earlier off camera about the Amazon.com's labor practices, and it's high tech is kind of a mixed bag. You have companies that have unlimited leave, family leave. You have, and I'm sorry, I don't know which company this is, but a minimum of $70,000 a year salaries for that's out in the Northwest. And then you have the stories like Amazon, who seem to be a high pressure, high turnover employer. Does that say anything about the prospects for labor unions in the future? I mean, how is the day of the labor union done?
No. I think that history always repeats itself. When employers get, you know, like this, high demand, high, just high pressure, high everything, and, you know, the safety kind of goes out the window because we're here to make money and make it happen, and you have to do it at all costs. That's when people get tired and get fed up. And unions were born because workers got fed up. They were tired of being mistreated. They were tired of poor pay. They were tired of being taken advantage of. And that's, you know, and safety. Safety was a huge thing. People were dying and, you know, they'd just pack up their body and move them over and continue the workday. And I think now, you know, when people get tired enough and mad enough, it's like when people get mad, they act. And I think Amazon will see a rise if they don't start behaving themselves. I mean,
hopefully they don't drag the bodies off and
Yeah.
put somebody else in.
yeah, well, we have a better form of doing that now.
Yeah, right,
you
it's
know.
a little different. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I don't think unions are any means, you know, something to scratch off of history. I mean, they are investing in the, you know, the Fight for 15 movement, and there are real impacts on society. Whether or not they're able to organize fast food workers and whatnot, that remains to be seen. But it does have effects on local level. I mean, St. Louis has passed the new minimum wage, Kansas City, Los Angeles, and so these are having real impacts on people's lives. So they're still relevant. Whether or not they take the current form, where it's very formalized or more organic form and grassroots and activism, it's hard to say where it'll lead. But some of the recent rulings from the National Relations Labor Board has made it a little bit easier for unions to try to organize. Whether or not they'll be successful, we just have to wait and see.
Jess, you get the last word here.
Well, I think there has to be a balance. As I said before, when we have aggressive or poor management, the workers need protection, and I think that's what the union's job is. Interesting thought about Amazon. I'm still contemplating that one. I think it's a high-pressure job. Evidently, so far, they've been able to compensate people and keep them happy enough that they haven't organized. But point's well taken. It's not far from that, I would think. But one of the things that sticks in my mind about the Amazon story is that there are a lot of people that go there and leave because of the pressure. And there are a lot of people that thrive under that. And in my career, I've seen people that would thrive under pressure, and those are the people that worked 100 hours a week, and to heck with family and everything else, that was their job. That was their thing. And they were successful for a while. And so we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Amazon. You mentioned the unlimited sick pay or unlimited family leave. And I think if you look at the fine print in that was within the first year. But it's a great program for those people. And I think it would buy a lot of loyalty with those employees, certainly.
Well, we are running out of time here. I'd like to thank each of you for being on this panel and talking about American workers. I think we can all agree that the American workers are what this country was built on and deserve our support as employers and as representatives. And we salute them on this Labor Day +3. And viewers, I hope you found something to be interested in tonight. Thank you for joining us. Good night.